To the ThirdSpace reading room. For today, we will be affectionately known as the Inner City Club of Cleveland. And I am so honored to be sitting next to Mr. Willard Jenkins, one of the leading authorities on the living history of jazz. And I'll tell you a bit more about his illustrious bio, but this is a Chocolate City, Cleveland experience and experiment. This is a bit of a salon, a bit of an oral history, a bit of a return to Chocolate City, and a celebration of Black music here in Black Music Month. So thank you all for coming out, and I'm so glad to get this party started. So before we go on, will you please join me in welcoming Mr. Willard Jenkins.
Thank you.
So I'm just gonna read his bio, the short version, and then and then we'll elaborate on it. And with this being a Chocolate City salon, I do have a bit of executive privilege here, so I want to start with my questions, but I invite you all to prepare your own questions so that we can really make this feel like this is the ThirdSpace living room experience. So Willard Jenkins today serves as Artistic Director of the DC Jazz Festival. He's a graduate of Kent State University. Willard has served in many capacities within the academic, arts, media, and entertainment industries, acting as a consultant, arts administrator, artistic director, writer, journalist, broadcaster, educator, and oral historian. Willard has served as artistic director of Tri-C Jazz Fest, the Beantown Jazz Festival in Boston, Tribeca Performing Arts Center in New York City, and as an artistic consultant to the Mid-Atlantic Jazz Festival in Maryland, 651 Arts in Brooklyn, Harlem Stage / Aaron Davis Hall in New York, and the Smithsonian Institution. As a jazz educator, he has taught history courses at Kent State University and Cleveland State University. He served as the executive director for the National Jazz Service Organization and as an administrator for Arts Midwest and the Great Lakes Arts Alliance. Willard is an experienced broadcaster, having served as program host and producer of WPFW FM in Washington, D.C., WWOZ FM in New Orleans, Louisiana, KFAI in Minneapolis, XM Satellite Radio, and BT. He is a skilled interviewer, having conducted in-depth oral history interviews for the Smithsonian Institution, the Rhythm and Blues Foundation, and the Weeksville Heritage Center. Willard is the author of the 2010 book, African Rhythms, the autobiography of NEA jazz master Randy Weston. In addition, he continues to be a prolific and sought-after writer and journalist, having contributed chapters to several books, written a series of how-to technical assistance books for the jazz community, and contributed articles to numerous local, national, and international publications, including daily newspapers and periodic journals, and publishes the blog Independent Ear on his site, openskyjazz.com. He lives in Rockville, Maryland, with his wife, Susan Jenkins, who serves as CEO of the Arts and Humanity Council of Montgomery County. If you can believe it, that is the short version of Mr. Jenkins' bio. And we are so thrilled to unpack it. And so please join me again in welcoming Mr. Willard Jenkins back to the ThirdSpace reading room for the first time. Awesome.
Thank you.
So, can you use this mic? Mm-hmm. Turn it on. So we always start with a soul check whenever we're in the space. So the first question I want to ask is, what would be the first song on the biopic, musical score of your life, the story of Willard Jenkins.
The first song, oh, that would be really, really difficult to name. You know, you know, that could be the Temptations or the OJs, or it could be Miles Davis. You know, it could be a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Well, let's say Miles Davis. So what?
Miles, so what? I love it. Beautiful, beautiful. So we wanted to start with your journey here to Chocolate City, Cleveland. So you were born in Pittsburgh,
Right.
But then your family moved to Cleveland when you were 11,
Right.
So how did you and the family get here? What brought your parents to Cleveland?
Well,
and then where did you land when you got here?
Well, my father was a newspaper man, and he was among the first generation of African American newspaper professionals. He worked on. He wasn't a writer or an editor, but he worked in the composing room, where they actually put the newspaper together. And he was a Tuskegee grad, and he worked in newspapers. And we were in Pittsburgh when I was born, and at the time he was working for a newspaper called the Pittsburgh Sun-Telegraph. That was back in the day when most major cities had 2 daily newspapers, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. And the Sun-Telegraph was the afternoon newspaper. And the Sun-Telegraph was bought out by the Post-Gazette, which, as folks know, is still Pittsburgh's leading daily newspaper. So that meant that there was no longer an afternoon daily newspaper. But my father, as a typographer, he was a member of a strong union, and he was a staunch union man. And although the Sun-Telegraph was folding, his union, my father's union, enabled all of the workers who worked in the composing room, etc. They all got job opportunities at different newspapers around the country. My father had started out working, you know, in the Black Dispatch. He worked for the Call Post, and he worked for the Pittsburgh Courier before he got the daily newspaper job. And so when this opportunity arose, he decided he was going to take an opportunity at the Plain Dealer, because he and my mother knew Cleveland, and it would be a more comfortable fit for them. So he took a job at the Plain Dealer as a typographer in the composing room. The composing room is where they put the newspaper together. And he worked here at the Plain Dealer for a number of months, you know, because Pittsburgh and Cleveland are so close. He would work during the week and then come home on the weekends. And he was establishing a space for the family to move to Cleveland. And so we finally moved to Cleveland. And when we moved to Cleveland, I went to Cornell Elementary School. And then I went to Alexander Hamilton for middle school. Okay. And when high school time came, I went to Adams, and then Kennedy was built. And we lived on Glendale Avenue, 13306 Glendale to be exact. And so that was right up from the corner of 131st. And the dividing line for Adams and Kennedy was 131st. If you lived on one side of 131st, you went to Adams. So you lived on the other side of 131st, you went to Kennedy. So we lived on the Kennedy side, so I went to Kennedy. and was in the first June graduating class at Kennedy. And so that was how we came to Cleveland.
Right on.
Yeah.
So, what was Glendale like? What was your street and your neighborhood? What was it like growing up there?
Oh, it was great. You know, I had a lot of friends and whatnot, and you know, it was one of those areas that I would say was about strivers. These are black folks, many of whom were first generation to have even graduated from high school, much less gone to college and whatnot. So there was a sense of upward mobility in the neighborhood as a result, and you know, like a lot of striving.
And can you tell us a little bit more about your folks? So your mom, your dad, and you have siblings as well?
Yeah, I have a brother named George, and he went into the printing business as well. But my mother went to a small. She was a college graduate as well. She went to a small school that no longer exists called Schaffler College, which was eventually absorbed by Oberlin. And so I remember for years when they used to have their alumni gatherings and whatnot, it was always through Oberlin College. And my father went to Tuskegee. Right. My mother's from Dayton, Ohio.
Okay.
My father's from Columbus.
Beautiful. So,
you know, all Ohio background. My father is the son of a Baptist minister.
Really?
Yeah.
Beautiful. And so you credit your dad's, or I should say your dad's record collection as being like one of your first introductions into jazz.
Yeah, you know,
correct?
my father, he didn't have a huge record collection.
Okay.
Unlike what has become mine. He didn't have a huge record collection, but he had a significant record collection. And he had a lot of jazz in his collection. Of course, he would also listen to Ray Charles and a lot of other music beyond jazz, a lot of blues, etc. But he had a lot of jazz as the core of his record collection. And that, of course, was in the days of LPs. And the LPs, as you know, the LPs always had a significant amount of information as far as the liner notes and as far as all what was happening on these records and whatnot. And so I just became interested in what he was playing, and I started reading those liner notes and started kind of educating myself on who's who on these records. And it just became a sound that stuck with me, and a sound that really made sense to me. And then when I got to college, then it was time for me to build my own record collection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you recall one of the first records that you got yourself?
One of the first that I got myself?
Yeah.
Oh, that was probably the Temptations.
Right on. Yeah.
Because we used to harmonize in the basement, you know?
Okay.
with our friends. Yeah. We used to harmonize in the basement, and I remember we used to, we were too young to go to Leo's Casino at night, but they used to have a Sunday matinee. And I remember they'd have things like the Temptations and the OJs, supposedly a battle of the bands and whatnot. So we'd go to those matinees and whatnot. So that was from some of my first live music experience.
Okay. So, okay, now I need to know more about Leo's Casino. So there's some people here who are familiar with it. Did you ever get into Leo's Casino? Were you able to sneak in, or did you get in?
Oh yeah, I'd go to those matinees.
Oh, the matinees, right?
Yes, the matinees. For underage people were allowed in those matinees.
Okay, right.
I wasn't going at night. No. My brother snuck out once and went at night. That was a big issue with my parents and whatnot. He snuck out and went out at night. You remember when Hugh Masekela had his big hit, Grazing in the Grass?
Yeah.
And he played Leo's Casino. And my brother, he had to go, so he and some friends snuck into Leo's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where were the other places that you could go see jazz being performed here in Cleveland?
Well, the number one place, well, first off, there were places like Syrah House, etc. There was a place on Kinsman called the Mardi Gras, and I'd go there, and I remember seeing Eddie Backus there a lot. These were like what I would refer to as organ joints. And Eddie Backus was the leading Hammond B3 organ player in Cleveland. So I would see him a lot, and people like him and Chink Stevenson and Kenny Davis and others at these, Ernie Kribda, at these clubs and whatnot. And then by the time I got to college, there was a prominent place that was developing on what we've referred to as the near west side, a place called the Smiling Dog Saloon. And the Smiling Dog Saloon was on West 25th. And the Smiling Dog Saloon was the place that was very important for me because it was the first place I saw Miles Davis, first place I saw people like Charles Mingus and Elvin Jones and the original Return to Forever with Chick Corea and Stanley Clarke and Herbie Hancock's sextet, and all these different people would play at the Smiling Dog. And this was when I was an undergrad at Kent. We used to drive the Smiling Dog Saloon on weekends to check out the various sets and whatnot. So that was where I was really got an opportunity to become immersed in the music from a live standpoint. There would also be concerts and whatnot at the Allen Theater and at other places around town, but the Smiling Dog Saloon was really important. Saw a lot of greats there for the first time. And as I say, Smiling Dog was on West 25th. But after a while, the neighbors in the area became concerned with all these black folks coming over to West 25th Street to enjoy the music. It wasn't as though jazz hasn't always had a robust following in the African American community as it should, but certain kinds of jazz, you can always get black folks out, and certain things, certain performances at the Smiling Dog, for example, would attract a fairly robust black audience. And so, one thing led to another, and the neighbors began to moan and groan about these black folks coming over to West 25th. Not that we were coming over there in masses, but we was just coming over there. And so they eventually pressured the city council member to pressure the ownership of the Smiling Dog, and the Smiling Dog eventually closed. They started doing concerts. Whenever they do something that was bigger than the club, they would do concerts at the Allen Theater.
Okay.
So they started doing that, and eventually it closed, which cut off a lot of activity, a lot of performance activity in the community.
This is maybe a difficult question, but Can you point to one memorable performance that you saw? Like, what would you say might be your favorite concert that you went to at the Smiling Dog?
That's a good question, because there were so many people that I was exposed to live, people I'd been listening to on record,
Sure.
but that I was finally getting an opportunity to see on stage as a result of Smiling Dog. And, like I say, it was, spent some memorable time there with Miles Davis, for example, right. And that led to my one and only interview with Miles Davis. And, I did, all those people that I mentioned earlier were all very important and all great experiences at Smiling Dog.
What was it like to interview Miles?
What was it like?
Yeah.
Well, the whole setup should tell you something about it. But at any rate, we set up this interview. It was myself and a fellow young writer, a brother named Robert Fleming. And he's been in New York for many years now. But he and I were young writers. And we got this bright idea that we both wanted to interview Miles, and we were good friends, so we were going to interview him for different publications. And I was going to interview him for a publication called the Cleveland Edition that was published right here in the in Glenville, and it was one of those so-called alternative weeklies. Okay. And so we arranged with Miles and his valet. We arranged a time. He was staying at the, what was it called? The Eastwood Motel? It was Easttown. Yeah, he was staying at the Easttown. Right, exactly. That was it. And he and his valet had adjoining rooms. So we arrived at the appointed time on a Saturday afternoon. And we went in ready for this interview. And they had the door open in between their adjoining rooms. And we could occasionally see Miles walking back and forth in his bathrobe and whatnot, getting himself together for the day, I suppose. So we're sitting there, and an hour goes by. We still haven't sat down for this interview yet. And 2 hours go by. Then shortly after 2 hours went by, we said, wow, we were young guys, we were starting to get discouraged. So we got up and we said, well, listen, we'll come to the club. This was on Saturday. We'll come to the club tonight and see if we can set something up for tomorrow, because they were going to finish their set on Sunday. So we were resigned to, well, we're not going to get this interview today. I get up, we're on our way out. I have my hand on the doorknob. All of a sudden I hear this voice from the other room. What y'all want to talk about? So we jumped back, went to his side of the room, and flipped on our tape recorders, and he proceeded to talk for the next couple of hours about all kinds of things. Not only about music, but about, if you know Miles, he had this great interest. He trained as a boxer. So he talked about boxing, he talked about women, he talked about all kinds of things. And it was great. And once we finally got to the point where we could turn on the faucet, everything was cool. But it was getting to that point. That had been the challenge.
Wow. So so you were writing for the Alternative Weekly, but were you still in college at this point, or had you?
No.
at that
I
point
was.
graduated?
I had. By this point, I had graduated.
Graduated.
Yeah.
So let's take a step back then. So after you finish up at Kennedy in '69, you go on to Kent State. What was Kent State like in the early '70s and late '60s?
Well, we were talking about that earlier. There were close to 30,000 students at Kent State at the time, but it was 300 black students. Okay? And so, you know, we were establishing certain things and basically establishing our presence on campus. And we eventually founded an organization called Black United Students. And when people talk about Kent State, and I'm very proud to be a graduate of Kent State was an invaluable place for me. It really was. But at the time, as I say, there was this struggle for recognition of black students and for the recruitment of more black students. So we started Black United Students, and people always, when they think about Kent State, they immediately go to May 4th, 1970, when those 4 students were killed. And yeah, I was there then. I was there that day, remember that day vividly. But prior to that, black students, we had had our own action. In fact, Kent State has a remembrance center, which is a very, very fine, small space, which at its core is about May 4th, 1970. But it really is about the history of student protest at Kent State University, which is very, very deep. There's a lot of history of student protests at Kent. As it turned out, and when you go in this Remembrance Center, and I was just there in May, when you go in this Remembrance Center, I'm in one of the first pictures as soon as, actually the first picture, as soon as you open the door, I'm in this picture. Yeah, I'm standing, and it's a picture of me and a group of brothers standing in front of the administration building like this. with black gloves, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, like I say, there was a history of student protests at Kent State. And if you'll recall, the origins of the Black Panther Party were in Oakland, California. And as a result of the growth of the Black Panther Party, coincidentally, the Oakland Police Department began to become more and more prominent. The Oakland Police Department was known for oppressing the Panthers.
Yeah.
And so the Oakland Police Department began to gain a lot of national and international notoriety, to the point where they decided they were going to go around the country on recruitment trips, recruiting officers for the Oakland Police Department. And they decided to come to Kent to recruit. And we learned about it, and we weren't having it. We organized a demonstration, and the demonstration led to our taking over one of the administration buildings. And we took over that building for several hours, basically in a sit-in fashion. And we sat in that building for hours. And the police authorities, the combination of the campus police and the Portage County Sheriff's Office, they started gathering buses around the building that we occupied for the express purpose of hauling us all out of there and taking us all to jail. And so we got wind of that, and we decided, cooler heads prevailed, I guess, because we decided, maybe our parents wouldn't appreciate that. So we peacefully marched. We decided we would march out of the building and make a demonstration in that way. And we peaceably marched out of the building. And we met all that weekend, and the president of the Black United Students and others began to gather various information. And one of the points of information that they gathered was that they learned that Kent State had to have a certain percentage of so-called minority student population in order to qualify for some of the funding they were getting. So he said, oh, okay, so we got the idea that we would walk off. And by Sunday, a plan was formed. All this started on Thursday. By Sunday, a plan was formed for us to walk, to demonstrate again by walking off campus en masse, all the black students. And those of us who lived in Cleveland, we walked off and we came home. And those who did not, they were put up in churches and whatnot around Akron, black churches in Akron.
Wow.
And so we stayed away for a few days, and we had this list of demands, and they acceded to our demands. And one of our demands was what is now the Center for African American Culture and whatnot and Study. And we demanded the development of the support for the development of a black student newspaper. When we developed the black student newspaper.
Amazing.
And that was where I got started writing, was for that black student newspaper.
Beautiful. Wow. So, what would you attribute your activism at that time to?
Well, what I attributed it to was I was there to learn, right?
Yeah.
Not only was I learning academically, but I was learning socially. I was socializing myself, and I was learning more and more about the black experience. Because, that was not something that we dealt with a whole lot in high school. But getting to college and seeing where you are a distinct so-called minority, it raises your consciousness as to who you are and who you need to be in this environment. And so, really helped to raise my consciousness about being a black man in America. And that was a really important experience in my development.
So what were you listening to at the time?
Well, I was listening to a lot of jazz.
Sure.
Because as I say, when I went to Kent, all of a sudden I was no longer directly connected with my father's record collection, except for a few things that I had snuck away with to college. And so I had to get my own record collection. And at the time, as a freshman, we didn't really have, later we had record stores in Kent, but not at that time. We didn't have a full service record store. And at the time, now, it's not even records anymore for the most part, but now music is released nationally now. Before, it was released regionally, based on the size of the community, of the marketplace that you were in. And so the records would come to Cleveland first before they trickled down to Kent. And so I was one of those who had begun to read about the music in various music publications. And so, I was learning about these new releases coming, and so I had to get to Cleveland. I didn't have a car at the time, so I was commandeering girlfriends' cars and some of my fraternity brothers' cars and whatnot, and I would drive to Cleveland to get the latest releases. At the time, it was the best record store was Record Rendezvous. Record Rendezvous had two stores, one on Euclid, one on Prospect.
Okay.
And the one on Prospect, there was a guy that ran that one who was a real musicologist, so you could talk to him and find out about all the new releases. So I was going to Cleveland and get the new records.
Yeah. So after Kent State, you came back to Cleveland.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about your first job with your newly minted degree in sociology?
Well, I'm laughing because my first work as a professional, I guess you could say, in Cleveland was right here in this neighborhood. Because I got a degree in sociology. And I had fooled around and at a certain point, I decided I really need to finish and get this degree. And so we were on the quarter system at the time. And my last quarter at Kent, I accelerated my process. I took 26 hours. That was a heavy caseload, heavy course load. And I finished. And in March, you don't march. When you graduate in March, you don't necessarily march unless you want to come back in June for commencement. And I said, heck with that. I'm just going to I went to the administration building, got my degree. And at the time, I had been, as I mentioned, I had been immersing myself in music. Mm-hmm. And I really had this sense that I wanted to work in the record industry. At that time, the record industry was a very exciting place to be. It no longer is as exciting as it was because of all the changes we've seen. But so the idea was, well, should I take this chance and just go to New York and get a job working in the record industry? Or should I come back here to Cleveland? Well, I decided to come back here because my parents were here, of course, and I had my room was still there and still intact. I said, well, let me just go back. Let me just go back home and see what I can find in the Cleveland area. But I had taken this huge course load, and I thought that I would get my degree, go back home, and maybe just chill for a couple of weeks before I hit the job market hard and started trying to find a job. But my father wasn't having it. He said, you got to get a job. So you got this degree, you got to get a job. In fact, you got a degree in sociology. So that qualifies you for social services opportunities. And he said, there's a man in our church. He went to Antioch. I grew up in Antioch Baptist Church. Okay. He said, there's a man in Antioch. He works in social services. He works for the Ohio Adult Parole Authority. He said, you go see him. So I went to see him, and lo and behold, they gave me a good job as a probation and parole officer. And so I was working in this neighborhood. And the nature of that work was such that I didn't have to be tied to a desk 9 to 5. There was field work. and that meant going around the community and visiting people on my caseload. And so that freed up opportunities to pursue what I was really interested in, which at the time started, the foundation of which was writing about music. So I had an opportunity to be out in the community, and I could pursue other things beyond my professional work.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, and one of which was when the Smiling Dog Saloon closed, it like cut off the spigot immediately as far as touring artists coming to Cleveland. Touring artists would come to Cleveland on occasion to play at some of the Playhouse Square theaters. But when the Smiling Dog closed, it really cut off a lot of that action. And those of us who were really into the music, we could feel it. And so a group of us got together and we formed an organization called the Northeast Ohio Jazz Society. And our intent was to present performances. And we began bringing artists in for concert performances. And our first concerts were at Cleveland State. And then we branched out and started presenting concerts at Tri-C. And so we formed this 501c3 not-for-profit called the Northeast Ohio Jazz Society. And we eventually were able to get funding support for our activities. And so that continued to develop. And at the same time, there was a man named Dr. Thomas Horning at Tri-C who was really interested in building a jazz studies program at Tri-C, which they have now, which is a thriving program. And so they invited me and one of my Northeast Ohio Jazz Society colleagues who was a provost at Tri-C, Dr. Larry Simpson. They invited us to be on the organizing committee for Tri-C Jazz, for what became Tri-C Jazz Fest. Yeah.
So, well, first of all, shout out to you and Mr. Simpson and their comrades for launching Tri-C Jazz Fest. Can you tell us about like the first edition? What was it like to contribute to the first performance? I think 1980?
Yeah, well, the Tri-C Jazz Fest, the core of Tri-C Jazz Fest mission is education. Right on. And so it started with this big week of education activities and culminating in a weekend of big concerts and whatnot. So it built from an education standpoint.
So I'm curious as well, what were you writing about at this time? Like what in the music, what about jazz were you particularly interested in? Were you writing about the like the new releases? You writing about the primarily writing record reviews and performance reviews, and also my father at the Plain Dealer, working in the composing room, he interacted with a lot of the editors in the composing room, and so he knew particularly a man named Robert Roach, who at the time was the editor of the Friday magazine at the Plain Dealer. And so he said, he said, I want you to come down and talk to Bob Roach, because he knew I had this developing interest in writing about music from my undergrad days and then some of those alternative weeklies and whatnot. So I was gaining experience writing about music. And he introduced me to Bob Roach, and we talked. And Bob Roach engaged me basically as a freelancer, but as a writer for Friday magazine. And at the time, there was also a man named Chris Columbi who was writing at the Plain Dealer about jazz. And he wrote a weekly record review column. So that was kind of his territory.
So my assignment became to write about. I wrote previews. So for the Friday magazine, I might write a preview of something that was coming to town the following week at the Allen Theater or wherever. So that's how I started writing for the Plain Dealer. And I think I got away from your question.
Well, I'm just wanting to know, like, what about, because you could write about so much as it relates to jazz. You could write about
as far
the
as what I wrote,
technical
you asked
stuff,
me what I was writing about. And well, in that case, I was writing about concert and club performances that were coming up in the coming week. So if so-and-so was coming to such and such theater, I would write about it. I'm forgetting the name of the place, but you'll remember this place. It was out off of Mayfield Road, I think, and it was a theater in the round. Front Row, that's right. So I write about things that were coming to the Front Row and various other places. And so, I was still writing record reviews as a freelancer for publications, but for the Plain Dealer, that's what it became about. Yeah.
So this is a bit of a segue into your latest book, Ain't But a Few of Us. But as one of those few, as a black writer, talking about jazz, writing about jazz, preserving the history and the legacy of it. I'm curious, who were you reading at the time? Were you aware of some of the other lines in the field?
I was reading all of the jazz publications, starting with Downbeat magazine. I was reading those publications religiously and familiarizing myself with writers and their bylines and whatnot. And at a certain point of writing about the music, I became aware of opportunities to travel, to write about music, to travel to different festivals in different places to review, to get assignments to travel, because there were at that point some of the European festivals, they all were connected with their, what at that point were national airlines. So, for example, there's a great festival in Italy, in the central part of Italy, called Umbria Jazz. It still exists, it's a great festival. And there were opportunities to get your airfare covered to go to these festivals. And this Umbria Jazz Festival, not only as if you were a writer and you got an assignment to review the festival, not only would they cover your airfare, but they'd cover your hotel, and when you got there, you had meals as well. And so there were these opportunities, and I would go to these festivals and be amongst other journalists from around the world, most from the US, but from around the world. And after a while, it became obvious that I was the only black writer amongst all these people. And this had become obvious to me before then, before that point that I started traveling to review different things. Because I first started out as far as branching out beyond Cleveland to go to festivals and performances. That first started with, there was the original Newport Jazz Festival at a certain point in the late 60s, early 70s. There was an uprising, an audience, a riot at Newport. And Newport, Rhode Island, being the exclusive, the words that's often used in the media, Tony, community and whatnot that it was, those wealthy people weren't having that kind of strife on their island, and so they closed down the Newport Jazz Festival. So the man who was running the Newport Jazz Festival, a man named George Wein, he was the founder. He took his operation to New York, and he began producing the Newport, New York Jazz Festival, and then eventually he got subsidized by Cool Cigarettes, so it became the Newport and Cool Jazz Festival.
Okay.
And those went around the country for a while. And so I was going to those festivals, and I would be amongst other journalists, because the festival publicist, press person, would often seat us in the same area of the concert halls and whatnot. So I was becoming acquainted with other writers from around the world, and particularly around the country. And it was, after a while, it was clear. So, wow, why am I the only black person among these people? There might be one or two others, but usually I'd be the only black writer. And so I'm thinking, well, gee whiz, the origins of this music we call jazz is a product of the African experience in America. We built this music. And so I'm like, where are the black writers? So that was a seed that was in my brain that just kept reverberating down through the years. I would meet black writers at various conferences and whatnot, but I wouldn't see them in the aggregate, nor would I have a sense that there were a whole lot of us. So that's where the title came from, Ain't But a Few of Us. So about 12 years ago now, at this point I had a website, and when you have a website, it gives you an opportunity to have a blog to express your own opinions and your own sense of the music, your own sense of the scene and what's going on, your own sense of these artists and whatnot. And this seed had been planted in my head, and it kept reverberating, like, where are the black writers? Why are there so few of us writing about this music? Why are there so few of us writing about black music? And so I would meet various black writers on occasion at conferences and at festivals, etc. So I kind of knew who was out there. And so I decided to conduct a series of interviews for my website that would be interviewing black writers on their experience, not necessarily accumulating a lot of gripes and grievances, but just on their experiences, how they came to write about music, and why it is peculiar that there weren't that many black writers. So I started doing a series of interviews, and eventually it became this book.
Amazing. I know I need to open it up to questions, but so I guess I'll just jump a bit ahead to a big question about the state of jazz today, like particularly the audience for jazz. I know that's a very important through line in all of your work, is like developing the audience of people who appreciate jazz and still celebrate it.
That's always the biggest issue facing this music, is audience development. There's no shortage of wonderful young musicians coming along. Perhaps the strongest sector in what we refer to as the jazz community is jazz education. There are young people thirsting to learn this music all over the world. There are conservatories, college programs, university programs, high school programs, all over the world, literally. And you go to the Jazz Education Conference, which is in January, and you see all these young people, and you realize that there's still this great interest in learning to play this music amongst young people. So there's no shortage of musicians coming along. No shortage of great music, no shortage of records, no shortage of festivals, but the audience is always a big challenge. Developing the audience for this music is always a big challenge. And so I look upon that as being the biggest issue, the biggest need in this music. So a lot of my work has been on in the area of audience development as a result of working with these festivals and concerts and whatnot.
And what does it mean to develop the audience? So is it about exposure? Is it about...
It's about exposure because, you know, one thing interesting about this music we call jazz is I could go around the room now and ask each of you, well, what is jazz? And I would get at least 10 different responses as to what the music is. And, you know, because, you know, jazz is not a style of music. Jazz is an aesthetic umbrella under which are a lot of different ways of playing. A lot of jazz means different things to different people. You know, jazz to you might be Ella Fitzgerald. Jazz to somebody else might be Herbie Hancock or Kamasi Washington or whatever, you know. So jazz means different things to different people. And, you know, it's a style, it's an umbrella under which are all these different ways of playing. So you have, you know, people who are, oh, I'm interested in this, I'm interested in that. So there's a lot of different ways to look at this music.
Beautiful. Well, this is a good place to pause. Can we give it up for Willard Jenkins? Yes, beautiful, beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you for coming out.
Any questions? Yes, please. Richard.
First of all, congratulations on being announced or selected as NEA Jazz Master for 2024.
And actually, I should explain that because I never said I was a musician, and I'm not. But the National Endowment for the Arts Jazz Masters honors were established in 1982. And then in 2012, the director of the National Endowment for the Arts determined that there should be a new category called advocate. And so I'm the 2024 recipient of the advocacy NEA Jazz Master.
So that ties into my question. So you mentioned that you were a probation and parole officer,
Right.
first job out of college, and you're doing this writing. So in terms of how you saw yourself, at what point did you decide that you were not? Because if you met somebody in 1973 and they asked you what you did, you probably would have said you were a parole officer. At some point, you redefined yourself. You saw yourself differently.
Yeah.
You became you know, how you describe yourself. I'm a writer.
A jazz advocate,
How did you talk about that self-discovery and transition?
Well, I mentioned earlier that as a result of starting the Northeast Ohio Jazz Society, myself and Larry Simpson were invited to be on the original organizing committee for Tri-C Jazz Fest. Part of the seed for Tri-C Jazz Fest was planted by a man named Dr. Reginald Buckner. He joined the Ancestors a few years ago. But Dr. Reginald Buckner was a brother from Kansas City, who was a jazz musician himself and was a jazz educator. And he had taken a sabbatical from the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis. And he took his sabbatical at Tri-C. And then part of his work at Tri-C became interacting with Dr. Thomas Horning, who was the director of music at Tri-C, to try and develop this Tri-C Jazz Fest, and to use the Tri-C Jazz Fest as a way of building a jazz studies program at Cargill Community College. And so Dr. Buckner and I became friends. And when his sabbatical ended and he went back to the University of Minnesota, we stayed in touch. And at a certain point, he came up for another sabbatical opportunity. And he had heard about a situation from an organization that was based here in Cleveland called the Great Lakes Arts Alliance. I didn't know it at the time. I knew from my work at Northeast Ohio Jazz Society, I knew about the Ohio Arts Council. I knew that all the states had arts councils. I knew about the National Endowment for the Arts a little bit as the national entity. But I didn't know that there were also these regional arts councils. And so the Great Lakes Arts Alliance at the time was headquartered in one of those huge old homes on Bellflower.
Oh, yeah.
And the Great Lakes Arts Alliance represented the states of Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and Ohio. And it turned out that Detroit has always had a hugely activist community of jazz musicians and enthusiasts and whatnot, educators. And so the National Endowment for the Arts had a big meeting in Detroit just to have people talk about what they felt were the needs of the jazz community. Because the National Endowment for the Arts had begun funding jazz opportunities at that time. And so they wanted to learn more. It was a kind of a needs assessment on their part. So it was so compelling, whatever the musicians in Detroit and what the musicians and the activists in Detroit were telling them was so compelling that they encouraged the Michigan Council for the Arts to adapt this funding to engage someone to do a needs assessment. And the Michigan Council determined that they couldn't, they would prefer to have that done on a regional basis. So they were able to shift this funding opportunity to the Great Lakes Arts Alliance. So Dr. Buckner found out about it and he said, "Have you heard about this?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, let me send you the job description." So I checked it out and said, "Wow, this sounds like this might be my way out of the adult parole authority." So I went for it, and I got the job. And the job only, even it was kind of a hang fly situation because I had a very stable job with the adult parole authority, but this situation was only promised for a year. It was a 1-year contract. And the responsibility was to go around that region, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and Ohio, and interview jazz artists, educators, radio people, those who presented performances and whatnot. And so I developed a questionnaire, and in addition to sending out questionnaires to this huge mailing list that they provided me with, I went out into the field. And that in that region, that meant renting a car and driving around different parts of that region, interviewing people and having meetings with people and discussing what they felt were the needs of the jazz community in their various areas. So at the end of that year, the evidence that I had gathered was so compelling that they decided that this should become a core program. But unbeknownst to me, while I was working for Great Lakes Arts Alliance, they were having merger discussions with the regional arts agency that represented the states of the upper Midwest. And those would be Iowa, Minnesota, North and South Dakota, and Wisconsin. And so they merged to become a 9-state regional. And the new 9-state regional was called Arts Midwest. And the director of Arts Midwest, he was so excited by this evidence that we had gathered from this needs assessment that he decided that we want to make this jazz service program a core program of this new merged agency called Arts Midwest. There's one caveat for you though. We want you to run this, but our new office is going to be in Minneapolis because they had a great office building and a great office in Minneapolis. And so they said, we need you to relocate to Minneapolis. So we moved to Minneapolis and lived there 4 years developing that program. And your question again started with...
At what point did you realize that you had found that the new career is such that you could...
That was it.
That was it.
And that work gave me an even stronger platform from which to seek writing opportunities and to travel more, particularly around that region. And of course, the hub of that region being Chicago. So I was in Chicago all the time. And it broadened my perspective tremendously.
Do we have another question? We have time for one more, Ms. Rita. Please, please. Excuse me.
So I was listening to you talk about getting audiences involved.
Yes.
My thing is, I'm looking at, like you and your father, me and my father. My father used to listen to all of the stations that played jazz at night. I think it was...
WCUI.
That's one.
Right.
And the other one, if I remember, was WDOK.
Yes.
So he used to record and listen to all of those stations. So I got a chance to listen to jazz, but I like jazz from the 1900s all the way to now. So like you said, it encompasses everyone. It encompasses me. My favorite is Ella Fitzgerald all the way to Samara Joy. So I'm looking at the standpoint from education, which is our education and how it has been eliminated in some parts, or I should say covered up so we don't get a chance to learn it. Which is, I think, is the problem for the audiences in regards to that. Because I don't think there's a lot of education or archival or anything of the various programs.
Exposure.
To present that to, like you said, the kids are doing it, but they're sort of weaning off in a sense, especially in a lot of the urban areas regarding black kids, and I mean a lot of black kids, because there would be more into jazz in regards to that. But the school system, some have, band and all of that, and the music system, but some of them have them cut. They don't have that. I was in the band when I went to school, had an instrument, all of that. But
we had our choice of instruments.
Exactly.
Right.
During that time, but that's not the case. And along with that, and having education about jazz from the 1800s in actuality all the way up to now would be, I think, a good thing to have. But I was looking for various programs. Do you know of various programs that are in this area or in every city that has that situation going on in regards to the music programs in the schools?
Not in the public schools, sadly. Not until they get to college. And college and university have jazz history and jazz. It starts with jazz, what they call jazz survey. And I know because I taught both of those at Cleveland State and at Kent. And that's where it starts. It doesn't always start at high school. And in high school, it's mainly about the band program and about those who want to play instruments or sing.
Beautiful.
One other question. Jazz tempo, did you ever?
I certainly was familiar with it.
It's not always done.
But I was too young to go.
My friends and I, whenever we introduce someone to a new artist, we have this group playlist called 5 to Get to Know Me.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were to give us 5 jazz songs that define you,
Oh, don't do that.
we'll keep it in an email.
Okay. You give me a chance to think about that.
Okay.
Right.
Sure.
Awesome.
But you gotta have, you gotta start with various things. I heard one of them earlier, "Song for My Father," "So What," "A Love Supreme," "Giant Steps." So we could go on and on and on and on and on and on. Go 1 o'clock jump from Count Basie. We could go on. Sarah Vaughan, Body and Soul, all kinds of things. Yeah, Lee Morgan, the Sidewinder.
No, keep it coming.
And let's not even start with Wayne Shorter's music. So there's all kinds of things we can look at. Betty Carter. I had the opportunity to work with Betty Carter on a program, and love so much of what Betty Carter left here for us to learn. So the list is endless, Dee Dee Bridgewater, Diane, whatever, Diane, we used all kinds of. I mean, there's 2 wonderful people playing tonight at Tri-C Jazz Fest. Jason Moran, wonderful piano player and the artistic director for jazz at the Kennedy Center. So I see a lot of his programs in D.C. And the superb singer, Cecile McLaurin-Salvant, is this evening as well. So that's the thing, there's all these different expressions of this music. Not all these people are playing the same thing, are playing the same style. You look at somebody like Robert Glasper, somebody like that who's deeply connected with hip hop. And hopefully, you talk about exposure for young people, hopefully some young people who go a little bit below the surface will recognize some of the influences on some of these young hip hop artists and the relationships they have with jazz.
Absolutely.
Like Kendrick Lamar, for example.
Absolutely.
A huge relationship with jazz.
You can always tell by their sampling.
Yeah,
That's right.
You can tell that's where it starts, yeah.
So we do have to get Mr. Jenkins back downtown for the Tri-C Jazz Fest banquet. We could talk to him all day, and hopefully we'll be able to invite you back. But before we go for real, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, what to you is the significance of being named the A.B. Spellman NEA Jazz Master for Advocacy?
Well, as a young person, there were black writers writing about jazz that I would read religiously. People like Amiri Baraka and A.B. Spellman. They were 2 of the black writers who were writing for international jazz publications, and so I followed their writing. So, and A.B. Spellman is someone he's in D.C. Someone I've known for many years. He used to run a program called Expansion Arts at the National Endowment for the Arts. So I knew him from that, and I of course knew him from his writing. He wrote a great book called 4 Lives. And so being the recipient of this award in his name has been really a wonderful thing.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for your time. Can we give it up for Mr. Willard Jenkins? And
thank you all for coming out on a Friday morning.
right, and being the heat. And I'll just say that I think you have just inspired a new honor for us, a new award, the Willard Jenkins Chocolate City Cleveland Jazz Masters. So congratulations for being the first, and look forward to bringing you back. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, and what a wonderful space. And what a great vibration in this room. You know, it really is. And thank you all for coming out.
Yeah, beautiful.